G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here with the next video in this build series of the Xinshi Metal Slug X vehicle model kit set. I'm looking at set 4, 5 and 6, so the Melty Honey, the Sarubia and the Landseek. In the last episode I showed the assembly of the kits just straight out of the box, and so that gave me an opportunity to see what sort of modifications I need to make or clean up I need to do. So there's a couple of things I've noted. Most of the kit I think will be fine as far as sort of painting it and all that sort of thing. The breech for the Melty Honey comes in 2 pieces, so you can sort of still see the seam there. I'm still working on that. The problem is, because it comes in 2 halves, at the end of the breech there you can sort of really see the seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my grinding tool and just try and clean that up a little bit. Okay, it's a bit hard to see there, but that's looking a lot better. Of course, it will hardly ever be seen, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It is sort of going to be tucked away and pointing down, so it's going to be tricky to sort of see it anyway. So I've still got a little bit of clean up on that to do, but you know, once it's all the seams are dealt with, that should be fine. Now for the Sarubia, I'm a bit concerned about these exhausts getting in the way of painting the rest of it. So some areas in here that need to be masked, which are pretty straightforward, but I would like it if I could remove these things, you know, and place them in once these 2 halves are together. So the exhausts of course slide in, and I reckon all I need to do is cut off this bottom piece here, and I should be able to put it in once the 2 halves are together. So let's give that a shot. I'm just going to take my nippers here and shear that off. Now of course, if you're snap fitting this kit, you probably don't want to do that, but I will be gluing this kit, so I'm not too fussed. I'll just smooth this off a little bit. Now let's see if we can drop that in once the 2 halves are together. Because as you can see, it's going to be a lot easier to do the painting on this part and then drop this in afterwards. So let's see if this fits. Look at that, no problems at all. So that will of course need a little bit of glue, but yeah, that's perfect. Getting pieces ready for priming, and I've noticed a few more issues that I've got to sort out. So first of all, on the exhaust on the Sarubia, I've actually drilled out the holes at the top, so they were just flat, but they definitely look a lot better with when they've been drilled out. I've glued this together, and what I want to do is actually deal with that seam in the center there. There's obviously, very obvious sort of seam line supposed to be there on the bottom bit, but for these upper parts, I actually want to deal with that seam first. So I've glued these together, and it may take a little bit of putty just to clean that up, or a little bit of super glue just to clean up that seam. Okay, one of the issues I have with the Landseek is that you can sort of see at the front where the body joins the chassis, there's a small gap there. Now that's fine, be able to glue that down, that's not a problem. But when you go to put the tracks on, make sure I get these around the right way, there's an issue where you can see those little hexagonal holes. I don't quite line up with the pegs for the wheels, and what that does is it forces the tracks up against the body, and it actually sort of opens up this gap a lot more. Well, a little bit more anyway, but there's definitely, the tracks are sort of up against the guard there. So in order to deal with that, what I've done is I've just ground out the holes, so they're no longer sort of those small hexagonal holes. They're a lot bigger, and that way they can sort of move up and down on the I guess the wheels. There's not a problem with them sort of misaligning with the pegs and being being distorting the body shape. So that's what I've done for that little issue, and that's a minor issue. I'd be interested to see if anyone else has come across those problems. The other thing that I've done is I've taken the plastic that was used for the figures, and I've set up a couple of tests where I have used different glues to stick it together. So at this stage I know that Tamiya Extra Thin doesn't work. So I've tried some ABS cement that does seem to be sticking okay, but I'm waiting for it to dry properly. And then the other one I'll try is just some CA super glue, just so that I know which glue I can use when sticking the figures together. But this stuff definitely isn't going to work, so it's definitely not a type of styrene, which I suspected. Alright, I've started the priming, so most of the pieces are sort of primed in black. Nothing really to write home about that. For the areas where I've got to paint some lighter colours, so for example there's a red band that goes across here, I've done the white primer. I've also cleaned up the seam there. There's still a couple of little bits where it's a little bit obvious, but I think that'll be fine. And on this side as well, it certainly took quite a bit of super glue and sanding to make that work. Also on this one here, for the numbers, I will mask those off, and then I can paint the rest of it grey colour. Now the figures, I'm a bit worried about the paint. I've used the same SMS paints for this. Given that this plastic is a little bit flexible, I am a bit concerned that I might get some cracking in the paint. So, you know, it is sort of interesting to see how it'll go. So far so good. I haven't sort of seen any evidence of that. But while we're on the topic of the figures, I did some experimenting with the glue. So this type of plastic, this one was with some super glue, and super glue seems to hold it okay. I mean, if you give it a really good, try to separate it, it will break off, but that's like any piece with super glue. However, the ABS cement I use, so this stuff here, I found this stuff works, somewhat better. Like it does come off, but it took a lot more force for that to come off. So I think what I'll do is I'll end up using this instead of super glue, I think. But if you use super glue will hold it as well. Just as long as you're not using a styrene based cement, you'll be fine. Okay, so I've got to do some color selection for some of these areas. There's also on the tip of the gun here, there's sort of two yellow stripes, so I'll paint this yellow, then mask those off. So there's a few bits and pieces that I sort of have to do a little bit of color painting, mask it off, and then the rest of it will be sort of the body colors. Okay, I've done a little bit more work on the Melty Honey. So I have painted these little bits in here yellow, so you can sort of see by the call out there, just the things around the exhaust. So for that I used SMS yellow, and I've also stuck these side pieces on, and you can see I've used some Tamiya putty in here because there's a couple little holes. So what I'll do is I'll sand that back, just to, I mean, you're hardly going to see it, but it's just so that the interior is sort of relatively smooth. Of course, I've still got the numbers masked off for the white. Now for the Sarubia, I've painted in the red, so that is using SMS red. And there's also a couple of sort of yellow pieces that go on the front back of it. So for that I've used SMS yellow. Now for the little cross symbols that go on here, I've actually sort of painted all these. I've used just for the black, I just use Surfacer black, and for the white I use Surfacer white. So if I unmask these and see how we went, I'm hoping the masking is okay, but you never really know until you take it all off. And I suspect I might have a little bit of bleed under some of this tape. Some of it seemed to sort of lift while I was airbrushing. which is just probably because I didn't have it sort of bedded down properly. Yeah, so I can see a bit where it has come through. It's alright, we'll be able to rescue that. Might just go in and touch up. Now normally when you're touching up white is kind of problematic to touch up because it's so transparent. What I might do is just use a bit of enamel paint. Yeah, so you can see, actually I don't think I'll worry about it. You can see there's the tiniest bit on the end of the cross there. I reckon I'll put that down to, I might try to weather that up. I don't think that's even worth cleaning up. Okay, so this should stick in here. Push that in. Yeah, looks pretty good, I think. So let's have a look at the other one. I think that one's maybe a bit better. Okay, so that'll be the hero side. Let's push that in. Okay, so now that means I can mask off this whole sort of these red parts here, which thankfully nice, clear, delineated panel lines should make this relatively straightforward. So these panel lines I will be of course using an ink wash. So they should come out nice and defined once I've done that. Okay, let's get a scalpel on that. I'm just following the panel lines there. Okay, lots of missed any areas. No, that looks pretty good. Okay, now these little bits in here, which I guess are the what are they? This sort of windows you look out of. I think I might cut them in those as well, even though they're going to be black, just with an ink wash. It's pretty messy. Not my best masking job, but that's all right. It'll be covered up with the black enamel wash anyway. Alright, so you get the idea. That way I can then sort of go ahead and paint the rest of the kit. I've done some sort of initial base colours. So for the Melty Honey, I've used a grey, and I've just used SMS Blue Grey. Now, I masked off the numbers. The yellow looks nice and bright. Of course, we'll weather that down a little bit. These numbers. Looks fine, nothing wrong with that at all. Both the Melty Honey and the Landseek sort of are grey, but I did want to have at least a little bit of variation. So for the Landseek, I've used haze grey, and if I put these two together, you can see that there is a difference between them. So when they're sitting together, there'll at least be a little bit of variation there. Now for the Sarubia, I used khaki green G3, and I also used this colour for the Landseek, the cover of the cabin, so I've used the same colour for that as well. So let's see how this masking came up. looks pretty good. Yep, that's pretty striking. With that at all. I've also done a base coat on the figures, just for their green uniforms, and I've noticed the seam is a little bit more pronounced than I would have liked. I did try to scrape a bit of it off, but because of the nature of the plastic that this is, it's not that easy to do. But for this I used olive drab. And I also, for like the hands and any of the skin color, I actually masked that off, so it should still be black primer underneath. And the reason for that is because I'll be hand painting that, and so I wanted the black primer sort of being left alone. I didn't want any green, so that there was no danger of, or at least little danger of, green tinge on the skin color. So you can see at the moment we've just got the black primer there, but I'll go ahead and brush paint that on with some water-based acrylics. I've started doing some detail painting on the land seat. So you can see there I've painted up the seats. And so the brown I used was this Mecha Color brown. And I've used this just try and keep the color palette pretty simple. These vehicles, of course, they're, you know, in the game, they're just, you know, a number of pixels, but I want to sort of keep the color palette pretty limited, just because, yeah, I think that sort of is in line with the graphics of the game. So I've also used the brown on these crates. Now, unfortunately, the crates in the back of the tray are actually molded in, so I've actually masked that off before I start painting it. So I just now, masking doesn't always work when you're brush painting, because you tend to use a little bit more paint, and sometimes the paint can get under the masking tape. So I still want to be, you know, I still want to be careful with the painting. I don't want to be sort of just going straight over the masking. It's just for those bits that I sort of inevitably miss. Okay, but you get the idea of what's going on. Now, the other thing that I've done is I've done a bit of detail painting with a lighter grey. So not a dry brush as such, but I've used Mecha Color light grey to highlight like these bars down the side, also the clips that hold in the shovel. I've also used it to sort of bring out the hinges and the door handles, you know, so just highlighting those bits. I've used the brown for the straps on the canvas rolls on the side of the tray. I've also used it on the steering wheel. Now for the canopy, there's these little sort of straps on the side. I've also used brown for those. So again, I've sort of limited the palette. I've just used the one brown, but I think that'll kind of work. Another thing that I've done is just, I need to put another coat on, but paint the fuel tank on the chassis there. So just doing these things just to highlight a few of the elements. So another thing I've done is I've started work on the skin tones. So you can see the dark base coat there. I'll talk about the colours that I'm using for the flesh. So I'm using this these life colour paints. So these are acrylic, you know, for brush painting. So what do we got? We've got the darker tone is UA 711. Okay, and that's what you see on the faces here. Of course, it's gone over a black primer, so it's a little bit darker. And this stuff, you do have to do it in lots of thin coats. So this is 3 sort of thin coats, and I can still see a little bit of the black coming through. But yeah, if you put this stuff on too thick, it will leave really obvious brush marks. Okay, so I've done that base color. The next one I'm going to use is this 709, and I should say this all comes out of the Flesh Paint Life Color set. So I've got Flesh 1 degree shadow, and then I think I use 709, yeah, Flesh 1 degree base, and then the last one I'm going to use is Flesh 2 degrees light. So just between these three tones, I think that'll be enough for the faces. I don't, for the skin tones, they don't need to be hyper realistic. These are game characters, and anyone who knows me knows that figure painting is not my strength. Okay, so just with this, I'm going to sort of paint on all the areas except the really sort of deep recesses. If I get this on camera. So I'm just lightly brushing this on. I don't want to put too much down at a time. You can sort of start to see how this stuff can look a little bit streaky when you put it down, so it does take a couple of coats. So that's enough, really thin coat for that one, and then I'll go over it again. And again, that really dark brown area will be just in the sort of the real recesses of the face. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and do that for the rest of the flesh tone areas. So on the hands, again, it'll be sort of everywhere but the deepest recesses. Done a bit of work on the figures off camera, so it's a little bit hard to tell, but I've done a little bit of dry brushing on the green there, and for that I used Mecha Color Deep Green. Now, because I haven't given it a matte coat, the dry brushing kind of didn't really work that great, so I probably should have put a matte coat down first. But the problem was that I wanted to do all the skin tones and all the other detail colors, and I didn't want to sort of be dry brushing over the whole lot of it, so I was a little bit lazy, but that's all right. I think it'll work fine. So I did a bit of dry brushing on the green. For the boots, I just used pure black. And after I've given everything a matte coat, I might do a little bit of dry brushing on the boots. Also a bit hard to see, but I did the belt as well, which is also in black. And for the skin tones, so it's sort of all done on the hands, and it's probably more obvious on the face. I actually have only used 2 colors for the skin tone, so I was going to use sort of 3 if we go from dark to sort of light. I ended up not going with the Flesh 2 degree light. I ended up just going with these 2 colors. I think it's enough given the size of these figures. So you can sort of see on this one, it hasn't come up too bad. It's a little bit rough. You can see some of the stroke, brush strokes on it, but it's not too bad. Now this guy, the other 2 have closed mouths, but this one has an open mouth. So for that, I just used a little bit of Mecha Color Pink just for the tongue. And for the teeth, I used white grey, and I sort of watered this down a little bit just so it's not super obvious. You shouldn't have sort of Hollywood teeth. And of course for the eyes, I've got the water slide decals, so that should work pretty well, I think, for those. On the backpack, I wanted to just add a little bit of detail, so for the straps I used Mecha Color Brown. So just to bring out a little bit more of that detail. And for some of the other figures, there's sort of some weapons and what have you. So for the bazooka, I've used dark grey green, again mecha colour. So that's come up pretty well, I think. You know, it looks pretty good. And I've used the same colour for the pistol as well. So the figures are ready for a gloss coat, so that way I can do the oil wash over the top of it. So I'll get those gloss coated. Now for the Landseek, I've sort of done a bit of brush painting on the crates that you can see there. I'm just going to remove the masking just to see how bad my paint work was. See how much of it bleeds through. Because the problem when you're brush painting and you've got areas masked off is that it may pool and seep under the tape. Now, I've had some bleed through, I can see it. Blow. Now, alright, let's see if we can get this on camera. In shot. Okay, so you can see there's a pretty obvious one on the back there. And also sort of it's sort of going into the wood grain there. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and use some airbrush thinner and see if we can clean that up. Okay, so just a bit of airbrush thinner. Tray here. Because it's water-based acrylics over the top of lacquers, I'm hoping that I can clean this up reasonably well. So in there and just gently rub. And it's actually cleaning up pretty well. So all is not lost. I'm not too fussed about the brown that's in the wood grain because I will be using a bit of an oil wash in there, so it'll probably cover it up, but I think that'll be perfectly fine. So disaster averted. Okay, the other thing that I did was I just added a bit of what is it, gunmetal to the shovel. So I actually used enamel for that. So some other detail painting I've done on the Landseek is I've just used the light grey mica colour for these little detail bits here on the bumper. For the number plates, which I've also done on the rear, I've used off-white, white grey, and I think I'll see if I can find some decals that I've got to actually make up a bit of a number plate just to give it a little bit of extra detail. The other thing I've done is the lights. I've painted them chrome silver, X11. I've also done the detail lights on the back in the silver, and I think what I'll do is I'll wait until I've sort of glossed, coat, done decals, all that sort of stuff, done the matte coat, then I'll put some clear red over the top of these because I think they're supposed to be red. And I'll do that for all the lights. Any of the lights that are sort of supposed to be tinted, I'll do that as the final bit of detail painting. Now for the detail painting for the Sarubia, there's a lot less sort of brush painting that's required. And a lot of it is just the sort of light details. So for example, the headlights here, it's none on the back, it's only those two. For that I've used Tamiya's X11 chrome silver. Also for the spotlight, just use the same silver there. Now on the call out, they sort of suggest that the exhausts are all the same colour, but I've decided to add a little bit of detail just for the pipes on the end there. So for those I've used Tamiya X10 gunmetal. I may end up just dry brushing a little bit of rust over the top of it once I've sort of got a matte coat on it. But, trying to get these sort of stay on the stick is interesting. So I just use a bit of double-sided tape, you can see there, on a coffee stirrer. And so yeah, it's not a perfectly flat surface, so it doesn't stick there particularly well. Moving on to the Melty Honey. I've painted the shovels in the same fashion as a shovel and axe, I should say, in the same way that I did for the shovel on the Landseek. I've also painted in the silver on the headlights, again just using X11. For the main body bit, I've just used the light grey Mecha colour again, just on the fuel can on the back there, just to give it a little bit more differentiation in the colour. Now this is the base of the gun, and so I think this is supposed to be, what's it called, a blast bag or something. So for that I've used another Mecha colour, I've used dark green, just brush painted that on. And then this is the little control panel that sits inside of the body. So it sits on these two little posts in here. I thought it'd be nice to give it a little bit of detail. So what I've done is I've painted it white, and I just used enamel white just because it's easier to sort of clean up if I messed it up. And again, because similar to the lights that are tinted, what I want to do is actually put a clear green over the top of this, but I think I'll wait until I've done sort of all the gloss and matte coat and everything like that. For the exhausts, they look quite dark there, but I've used X10 gunmetal for those, and I might add, I don't know, a bit of weathering to those as well. Let's see, so some of these pieces I've added just some sort of light grey detail just to give it a little bit of contrast again, and again sort of this light grey that I've been using for that. The other thing is the shells, which I did have a bit of a mishap with. They sort of all broke apart. It was a mishap with I guess a happy ending. It was a happy accident. So these all sort of come in a pack of 6, and they're sort of all joined together, but they kind of broke apart, and it wasn't such a bad thing because it actually made it a lot easier for it to paint them. So these are just painted with the white primer, and then for the red on the end I used XF7, and I literally just had a little bit of XF7 out and just, you know, dunked the tips in. So nothing too special there. They're not super accurate, but it'll at least give the indication that yeah, these things have I guess a red firing cap or whatever they are on the end. Alright, so everything is now ready to go for a gloss coat, ready for the next step. Everything's got a gloss coat, so it is just a functional gloss coat. The fact that it's not about getting it super high glossy, but it's about making it so that the panel line wash, or the pin wash that I'm going to do, is able to flow properly in the crevices. So I'm going to leave this video here, and in the next video it'll be all about the panel lining, decals, dry brushing, and of course the final reveal. So until then, I'll catch you later.